The Niners, like many teams, look to the offseason for an opportunity to build a team to reach the Super Bowl. And well, that got me thinking recently if the Niners actually have a Super Bowl winning team. And luckily for us, I found an article from Bleacher Report that says a formula to predict next year's Super Bowl winner. I've already covered the offense in part 1, so if you're interested in that, I'll link it right here. But in this video, we're going to cover how the Niners are recreating the steel curtain and cover the defensive side. In this article, they gave these specifications, and some of the things that stand out on the defensive side of the ball is a 6th ranked team defense, and a team defense that housed a player who garnered 11 sacks, and a player who garnished 6 interceptions. In this video, I hope to break down if the Niners actually are going to be able to recreate the #1 defense they had most of the year last year under a whole new coaching scheme. As many people know, the Niners defensive coach DeMeco Ryans left to go get a head coaching opportunity with the Houston Texans, who actually played for when he was a player. Regardless, this left the Niners in a sticky situation. They had one of the best defenses across the entire NFL, and while they didn't want to change too much about it, they did want to make it better if possible. So they brought in a different type of coach than they've been recruiting in the past, and the guy they decided to bring in is Steve Wilks. He has much more experience than Robert Saleh and DeMeco Ryans. He's also had head coaching opportunities, and his defensive style is also different. He's a much more aggressive defensive style than Robert Saleh or DeMeco Ryans. For instance, in 2019, Steve Wilks had a blitz rate that was top 4 across the entire NFL. And in comparison, last year, DeMeco Ryans had a blitz rate in the bottom half of the league. But what does this actually mean for Steve Wilks coming over to San Francisco? Does this mean that San Francisco is going to get to the quarterback more, or burned a lot more on big plays? And this is where I really want to argue that San Francisco is going to see a considerable jump in improvement from last year's defense to defense led by Steve Wilks. And I know the Niners were #1 most of the year last year, but they didn't leave the league in sacks, even though they probably had one of the most talented defensive lines across the entire NFL. This year, obviously, they've gotten stronger there, but with the addition of Steve Wilks and adding more blitzes, you should see a jump in those sack numbers. But that's not the only thing you should see. You should also see an increase in the interceptions the Niners were able to get. Even though they were #1 in the league, you always want more picks. And many people are worried that the Niners players just simply won't be able to cover opposing players one-on-one. But Steve Wilks recently spoke about this and said he believes he has everyone he needs in the building to play a little bit more aggressive man-to-man press coverage. And a player that I love in this solution is Darrell Luter Jr., who I believe Steve Wilks hand-selected to develop into an outside corner. So with the addition of Steve Wilks, I think the Niners have a defensive coordinator who will be able to repeat a similar level of proficiency as his predecessor in DeMeco Ryans. So therefore, according to the Bleacher Report article, I think the Niners defense can definitely be at least a 6th ranked team defense. The next part of the Bleacher Report formula was a defensive player who garnished at least 11 sacks last year. And while many teams frankly don't have that, the Niners have 2. One in their defensive player of the year in Nick Bosa, who garnished 18.5 sacks, nearly double what Bleacher Report wanted. But not just that, they have Javon Hargrave coming in from the interior, rushing these passers and getting to the quarterback last year 11 times, and throughout his career, he's been extremely efficient rushing from the interior. The next 2 players that must be mentioned on the San Francisco defensive line is Eric Armstead, who definitely makes life easier for the rest of the defensive line. Really, his huge frame and being able to take on multiple blocks is a huge asset for the Niners, and that's why they gave him such a huge contract. But another player that I expect to make a massive jump from year 1 to year 2 is Drake Jackson. He's put on considerable mass, and the Niners kind of knew he would need about a year to develop into an NFL body. But even last year, Drake Jackson was good enough for 3 sacks and even 1 interception. So therefore, I think the defensive line is plenty strong enough to have a player to garnish at least 11 sacks. The next part of the Bleacher Report article we need to dive a little bit more deeply into is the defensive player who has the ability to garnish 6 interceptions. An area that we need to first address to answer the question if the Niners will be able to intercept the ball 6 times with a single player is the defensive secondary, specifically the corners in Charvarius Ward and Lenoir. They both don't really pick the ball off a ton. Ward because he doesn't get targeted, and Lenoir did have an uptick, but they're not true ball hawks. Luter Jr., the Niners pick from this draft, a corner, might even push Lenoir eventually for his starting job, and I think he's more of a ball hawk than both of these guys. But another part of the secondary we need to examine a little bit more deeply is the players that really ball hawk, and that's the safeties Talanoa Hufanga, Tashawn Gibson, and Jair Brown. All of these guys are absolute ball hawks. Tashawn Gibson had 5 interceptions last year, while Talanoa Hufanga had 4. And throughout his time in college, Jair Brown had 10 plus interceptions the last 2 years. Furthermore, with the increase in blitzing that Steve Wilks has planned and the new emphasis on press man coverage, I wouldn't be surprised to see more interceptions out of Hufanga, Gibson, and even Brown if he starts. But not just that, the corners will have more opportunities to make plays on the ball because the quarterback won't be able to predetermine where he goes, and therefore it's going to throw a whole lot more picks, or at least that's what the Niners are hoping. So for me, I think the Niners do have players who have the ability to pick off the ball 6 times this year in either Brown, Hufanga, or Gibson, but we might even be surprised by the production from the corners in Steve Wilks' new aggressive style defense. So while I could end right now and complete the Bleacher Report formula and say the Niners have a Super Bowl winning defense, I think it would be a shame not to mention a huge part of their defense in their linebackers. The Niners have some of the best linebacker play across the entire NFL, largely thanks to Johnny Holland, Robert Saleh, and D'Amico Ryans. All those guys had such an emphasis on the linebacking position, which is actually nice that Steve Wilks is now emphasizing the defensive back position. I think it's going to make the Niners defense much more cohesive. But speaking about the Niners linebackers, they have some absolute studs there. They have Fred Warner, and everyone knows him as an all-pro linebacker, but someone that's not nearly talked about as much is Dre Greenlaw, and I think he's equally as good. He flies sideline to sideline and plays aggressively and makes players pay when they're running up the middle. And the Niners did lose a player who I think was phenomenal as well in Azeez Al-Shaair, but they do have plans to replace him with either the rookies they picked up this year in Jalen Graham or D. Winters. But also, someone that I think is probably in the front running is Marcelino McCrary-Ball. This guy is a baller who has the ability to fly around the field, and the Niners linebackers are kind of like DBs. Even Marcelino McCrary-Ball is a safety turned linebacker, and that's going to help the Niners turn over their ball more. Breaking down the Niners defense a little bit more deeply using the Bleacher Report formula, I think it's clear that they do have a Super Bowl winning defense. But the question then remains, do they have a Super Bowl winning offense? And luckily for you guys, I did make a video answering this right here, and I'll link it. But if you guys do want part 3, let me know down in the comment section. It would also help me know if you like this video by actually liking the video and subscribing. Thank you guys so much for watching. It truly means a ton. And as always, let's go Niners.